Good morning. Hey, I hope things are going well for you. Glad that you're here. I have this memory in my head from 2001, way back in 2001, all those years ago. I was sitting on the couch in my in-laws' living room, stuffing my face with pizza, Monocle's pizza, nonetheless. If you've had Monocle's, some of you know what that's like. Stuffing my face with pizza, getting ready for the 2001 Super Bowl. That year, two teams played because two teams always play each other in the Super Bowl, and this year was interesting because the first team that was introduced was the St. Louis Rams. Now, that year, the St. Louis Rams were introduced one at a time when they came into the arena for the game. The reason why is because they had these amazing players: Kurt Warner, Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, Marshall Faulk. They were called the greatest show on turf. They had broken records for single-season yardage and points scored, and they were the favorites. They were the Goliath in this. And nobody, including me with grease all over my face, thought for a minute that these guys could lose to their opponents. Their opponents back in 2001 happened to be a team called the New England Patriots. The Patriots, though, when they came into the arena to play the game, they weren't introduced one at a time. They came in all as one big group, and the announcer said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the New England Patriots." They were the underdogs. They were going into battle. They were going into a very tough game that they were not expected to win. And guess what? They won. And now everybody hates them, which is fine with me. I'm fine with that. Here's the deal. When we go into a battle in our life, when we are the underdog, when times get tough, what we learn from the Patriots in this is that you cannot go into those situations alone. You need other people when things get really, really tough. So we've been in this series called I'd Like You More If You Were More Like Me. We've been talking about how all of us have been designed for intimate, deep connections, deep relationships. We were designed to know other people and to be known by those other people. Now, for you, you hear that and you may go, that's a bit rosy, because have you met the people that I'm connected to? I don't know that I want to know them, and I'm not sure they want to know me, and I think that's probably okay. Well, the one thing I'd never want to be accused of as a follower of Jesus is not being connected to reality. So let me do a couple things here. If you've ever heard that becoming a follower of Jesus will make your life perfect and easy, that is not true. The reality is, becoming a follower of Jesus is the best decision, but that doesn't mean it's easy. And that doesn't mean it's perfect. You may have heard from us about relationships. You may have heard about, you get into a group, it'll be amazing. It's like a party with brownies and constant conversation. Nobody in your group is going to be passive-aggressive on social media or turn junior high behind your back. Nobody's going to do that. That's not true. But that doesn't mean it isn't good. See, what I've found in my life, and the decision in my life to follow Jesus, to be like him, to live as he would live if he were me, that decision is the greatest decision I've ever made. And to connect with other people who are doing the same, that's the greatest decision I've ever made. But it did not make my life perfect. And this is the point I want to prove to us. Jesus isn't good because he makes our lives perfect. It's because when our lives aren't perfect, Jesus is still good. When we go into the valley, when we're the underdog, when times get dark, when things get tough, the goal that Jesus had is not to make our lives perfect. It's to be good even when things are not perfect, even when things are dark, even when we're the underdog. There's this great verse and this great poem in the scriptures that helps us understand what he means here. A lot of times it's, the ironic thing is most of the time when you and I hear it, it's at a funeral. So that'll set this up. And we talked about this earlier in the service. It's Psalm 23. It begins with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But there's a line in this poem that I think is really helpful for us as we start talking about this idea of what happens when we go into dark times. And that line goes like this: "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Even though I walk through the darkest valley, those valleys are dark places, are difficult places, are challenging places, places that aren't perfect, places where there's pain, where there's pressure, where there's stress. Now, I don't know what your valleys are today. I mean, some of you, your valley might be, driver services, You may know that you've got to go get your driver's license renewed and you want to go to the DMV and you got to go do that. This is what I did this week. I went on Friday. And it's really an interesting setup because what happens is you wait 45 minutes, you give someone your money, and then they take the worst picture of you that will ever be taken. That's a dark valley right there. Maybe for some of you, you've been like me, it's the construction on Spring Creek. Come, Lord Jesus, when will it end? Maybe it's more serious than that. Maybe for some of you, it's family court. You have to go back and fight the divorce again. You have to go back and fight for custody or rights for your kids again. Maybe it's a hospital, it's a cancer ward, where you've received a diagnosis or someone you care about has received a diagnosis, and now you're in the fight of your life. That's a dark valley. Maybe you're headed to the principal's office to pick up your kid again. Or maybe you are the one who's been sent there again. That's a dark valley. That's a difficult spot. What I know today is that if you're a living, breathing, walking human being, I am assuming that either right now or sometime in the future or sometime in the past, you know and will know and have known what it means to go through a dark time, to go through a valley, quote unquote. And so because of that, what we're going to operate on today is this assumption. The valley is not an exception. It's an assumption. The valley is not something rare that happens to human beings. It's something that happens to all of us. All of us go through dark, difficult places in life. It's not an exception to the rule. It's the assumption. All of us are going to do that. All of us are going to go through it. And that's overwhelming, and it makes us want to give up. But before we give up, the second half of that verse in the psalm really helps us because it says this. It says, even though I will walk through the valley, the dark valley, I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. See, when you're the underdog, when you're fighting a difficult battle, when things get tough, that with makes a whole lot of difference. I think about when my daughter was young and she'd call us. She'd already been in bed for a little while, and she'd call us and we'd come in and she'd go, there's a monster in my room. And we would look in the corner and there would be a shadow on the wall. And you know this, if you're a parent, you know what this is. Like the coat has been hung on the bed, the end of the bed, and the night light has sort of created the shadow on the wall. And so we, as great compassionate parents, would just look at her and go, it is a monster, honey, and he's probably going to devour you. Sleep well, see you in the morning, probably, I don't know. That's not what we did. Don't call DCFS, that's not what we did. What we did was we went in and we picked up the jacket, said, oh no, look honey, it's just a shadow. It's okay, there's no monster, it's just a shadow. And we put it back down. We'd put it back down on the bed, where it was before, and then we would leave and she'd fall asleep. Nothing changed. It was just as dark. The shadow was still on the wall. What was the big difference? The big difference is in the middle of the darkness, somebody went in there with her and everything was fine. When we're the underdogs, when we're in the dark valley, when we're in the fight of our lives, with matters tremendously. God shows up in those moments. God promises us, I will always be with you. I love you. I choose you. And I'm asking you to choose me. So God is always with us in those valleys, but sometimes he shows up through other people. And this is why it's so helpful to talk about relationships, whether it's our connection to God or our connection to each other. Here's the reality about the valley. We will not survive the valley without healthy relationships. We will not survive the valley without healthy relationships, connections to God, and connections to each other. We won't make it through. We need these things to get through those times when we're the underdog, when we're fighting the deep battle, when we're in tough times. So let me ask you this as we get started. Who's with you? If you're in the valley right now, who is with you? Who's walking with you? Who's the person that stands next to you? Who do you text when things fall apart? Who's the person that beats you to the hospital when you say you're going with your family member or your child or your parent? Who's the person that you take the questions that keep you up at night and you put them in their lap? Who's that person that you could show up at their house at 3 a.m. or their apartment at 3 a.m. and instead of punching you in the face for showing up that early, they open the door, they give you a cup of coffee and a spot on the couch? Who is that person? Because without that connection to others or without that connection to God, we'll never make it through the valley. We'll never make it through the valley. So, since it's an assumption we're all going to go through this, I just want to talk a little bit about what life looks like as we're going through those times. First thing we need to know about the valley is this. In the valley, being connected isn't optional. It isn't optional. It's not something we can pass on. They did this study with mice, and they would take one mouse in a cage, and they would stress the mouse out. They would apply tremendous amounts of stress. I'm not sure how you stress a mouse out. I would love to know, because there are some in my walls at my house right now I'd love to give a really hard time to. And they would stress this mouse out, and they would measure his blood pressure. And the blood pressure, of course, went through the roof whenever they stressed him out. But then they'd bring his little mouse buddy and pop him in the cage too. They would apply the same amount of stress, and his blood pressure would only go up half as much. Why? Because they were together. Because that width makes a tremendous difference. And so there are times, like there's a book in the Bible called Hebrews. And in the book of Hebrews, the people then who were Christians were facing tons of persecution. And I don't mean they didn't get to say whatever they wanted. What I mean is, for being a Christian, you could be fired from your job, you could be arrested, or you could be executed. And so there's tons of pressure and tons of stress on people who call themselves followers of Jesus. And so into that period of time, the writer of Hebrews says this. He says, "Let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." What he's saying is, listen, I know things are going crazy. I know things are stressful. I know you're in the dark valley, and I get that, but let's not forget that we need each other. Because, you know this, it takes a lot of energy to maintain healthy relationships. Most of us would rather have like 12,000 Facebook friends than to have one really close one, because we just don't have the time. It's a lot easier to have all those little connections out there. It's a lot of pressure, it's a lot of stress. Not to mention the fact that when we get stressed out, we like to turn inward. But what happens when we're in the valley is that suddenly this thing clicks and we want to start reaching out. We want to reach out to other people, but we also want to reach out to something beyond us. We want to reach out to God in those moments where we don't know what to do, when we're suffering, when we're the underdog, when we're in the battle of our lives. We want to reach out to something bigger than ourselves. And so for the people in Hebrews, the interesting thing is it was too dangerous to stay by themselves because they wouldn't have had the energy to keep going. But it was also really dangerous to be together because when they were in a big group, it made them a lot easier to capture. The Romans were like, hey, I'm glad you all got together. Then we just have to make one trip and we can take you all to prison. And so it was too dangerous to be alone, but it was too dangerous to be together. And some of us know what that feels like. Because we've turned to somebody when we were in a dark spot and we've opened ourselves up to them and told them something in confidence, and they went and spilled it to everybody else. We've turned to someone and say, I need you. And what we got in response was no text bubbles, no phone calls, no knocks on the door. We put ourselves out there and we got burned. We got burned. People have left us hanging. And what that says is that in the times of valley times, in dark times, in those stressful times, we know that at the time when we need others the most, we actually want them the least. Let me just do this on my own. I can figure this out. I don't need other people right now, because the other thing that could happen is I could open myself up and they could hurt me again. At the time when we need others the most, we want them the least. There's an old saying that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. And that's what we want to do. We want to get through this time as quick as we can, but that's not what really happens, because if you want to go far, go together. Because valleys are usually long, and that's why I would add this. Alone, if you go through the valley, alone isn't an option. It's not an option because you've got a long journey ahead and you need other people to help keep that journey going. Because any great story that we read about a person, any great story we see in the Bible where people are operating at their peak, it's rarely about just one person. It's about a whole group of people who are going far together. When we're in the dark spot, when we're the underdog, alone isn't an option. So let me ask you, who have you invited into the valley with you? Who have you said, come in, walk with me, because right now I can't do this on my own? Who have you opened yourself up to and given permission to encourage you and engage you in these really dark times? Because without that, whether you've offered that to God or whether you've offered that to another person, without that, we're not going to make it. Because in the valley, people aren't optional. At the same time, here's the other thing we got to know. In the valley, people aren't optimal. When times are dark, we who are walking through the valley and the people who are with us are not always at their best. Let me illustrate this differently. We're going to do a little group exercise, okay? A little group participation here. Let's all do this. What happens at Heartland stays at Heartland. It's going to be fine, okay? Do me a favor. Raise your right hand real quick, and I'm going to do it too. I'm right here with you. Raise your right hand, okay? And then I want you to repeat it. Some of you have your left hand up, okay? Right, left. Right hand. Repeat after me. I am going to do something stupid. I just don't know when. Right? Okay, you didn't have to repeat that, but great. If you're a human being, follower of Jesus or not, at some point, today, tomorrow, this week, you're going to do something stupid. We all are. All of us do. And so that's what makes this so difficult, is because when we need people in our life and when we are in dark spots, we think we're going to make all the best decisions. And yet, we're all going to do something stupid. That's why the Bible has these great pieces of wisdom that it offers us, like this one from Romans. It says, accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you. Well, that's interesting. Why would the Bible have to teach people that? You know why? Because every once in a while, we need to be accepted despite the fact that we've done something stupid. And this gets really sticky when we're in the valley. John Ortberg says this. He says, being in relationships with other Christians doesn't mean that you get to be with people who are easy to be with. Because we all do stupid stuff. And so if we're in the valley, there's a couple little things underneath this that we need to deal with. Number one, if you're walking through a dark time right now, if you're going through the battle of your life, if you're the underdog, you need to know something. It's going to be really hard for you to make wise choices. It's going to be really hard for you to make wise decisions. We just need to acknowledge that. And I want to challenge you in that. When I'm stressed, when things get dark, I tend to eat more. Call it stress eating. Some of you can relate to that. The darker things get, the higher the calories go. It's just, that's how it works. And so for me, when I'm in a valley, what I need is somebody who comes along and says, dude, no amount of microwave pizza rolls is going to make it any lighter in this dark valley. You're making an unwise decision. I know it's hard right now. I know you're stressed. What we need in that moment is people who will encourage us and provoke us. So the passage in Hebrews says there's encouragement, but it also says this. It says provoke one another to love and good deeds. What does that word provoke mean? That word provoke means to incite. For example, when I was a teenage boy, I had to be provoked to be up before noon. That's what it means. I needed to be incited to get out of bed. My mom was usually the one who had to do that. She was like, I don't care how dark the valley is. You got to mow the grass. Get up. We need people who will come alongside of us in the valley and say, listen, I'm going to encourage you. You can keep going. You can do this. But they also need to be the people to say, you can do better. The choice you're about to make is not wise. And the reason I say that is because as a pastor, there is a script that I've seen play out over and over and over again. People walk into dark places with tons of stress and pressure. Things start falling apart. They make a choice to blank whatever, too much, drink too much, overreach the boundaries of their sexual relationships, whatever it might be. They do too much of something. They make that choice, and the consequences splinter out for the rest of their lives. They needed somebody in that moment to say, listen, you can do this. You can handle this difficult time, but I got to provoke you a little here. This is not a wise choice. No amount of drinking or sex or poor decisions is going to make it any brighter in this dark valley. So I'm with you. We're going to go through this. But you need to make wise choices. And the Bible is filled with this idea. As a matter of fact, in Proverbs, it says this, where there is no guidance, a people falls. But in an abundance of counselors, there is what? Safety. In those times when we're in the darkness, when we're in the valley, what we need are people who will step up and say, you can do this, but let me help you make a wise choice. Let me help you make a wise choice. So for us, if you're in the valley today, are you making those kind of decisions? Are you making wise, healthy decisions, or are you choosing to try and turn the lights on in a really destructive way? Who's that person that's been trying to encourage and incite and provoke you to good stuff, but you've kept them out because it's just too hard? Who is that person? What would it take for you to let them in? So first thing we need to know is, when you're in the valley, you're not going to make wise decisions. You're going to be tempted not to. The second thing is, if you and I are with someone who's going through a dark time, please don't try and fix them. We should not try to fix them if you're in that place with them. Some friends of ours, their daughter, they were in Florida at Disney, and their daughter has spina bifida, and at some point in the night, she went into an unresponsive state. So they performed CPR. That didn't work. They called an ambulance, rushed her to a local children's hospital. At the children's hospital, she was placed in a medical coma until they could find a medicine-induced coma, until they could figure out what was wrong with her, what had happened. And so I and another friend of mine jumped on a plane and we went to Orlando and we went to the hospital and we sat in their room with them for 4 days. And the whole time I was there, like that pastor side of me wanted to say the thing that made everything better. And like there were a couple times I was like, and instead what I did is I fought it and I just shut up and sat there. And when it was time to pray, I helped him pray. When it was time to talk, I talked. When it was time to listen, I listened. When it was time to take him out for pizza, get him out of the hospital, I did that. That was by far the easiest thing we did while I was there. But I just sat there and just showed up because here's the interesting thing. When we're walking with people who are in that darkness, in that dark valley, the Bible says this: we should rejoice with those who rejoice, but then we should also mourn with those who mourn. Mourn with those who mourn. That means be sad with those who are sad. It means sit with them in the midst of it. It does not mean to say the things that are beginning to occur to us. It does not mean saying, God must have a plan for this. Followers of Jesus, I want to talk to you for a little bit here. If you're walking with somebody who's in a valley, I just need to say this to you. If you're in that spot with them, this does not mean tell them what you're thinking and say, oh, God must have a plan for this. Or, oh, he's in a better place. She's in a better place. Or, oh, God must have needed another angel in heaven. Because when you say that, it has nothing to do with that other person. It's all about us. And it's all about us not being able to manage a situation that feels out of control and we feel like we've got to fix it. That is not what God has called us to do when we're walking with each other through the darkest of valleys. That's not what we're called to do. Because here's what I know. In the valley, presence is much more valuable than purpose. When we're in the darkness, what we need to hear from people, what we need from people who are walking with us is just to be with us. Not to say God has a plan. That may be true. Please don't mishear me here. That may be true. God has a plan for this, and we'll get there. But right in that moment, in the midst of the darkness, what people need, what we need, what I need, when my life is falling apart, when my marriage is falling apart, when my kid gets arrested, when I get that diagnosis, when my job has been eliminated, what I need in that moment is not God has a plan. What I need is God will be with you, and so will I. Because, as the psalm says, God says, listen, even in the darkest valley, I will be with you. That presence is so much more important. And honestly, guys, that's what the church is for. That's why we're here. Is to be present with each other, because all of us are valley walkers. All of us have either been through it, are going through it, or will go through it in the future. That's why we're here together. And so we desperately need each other, but we've also got all of our imperfections, and we just bring them together in like one big human soup. And that's what the church is. It's not perfect, but it is so good. And we share those things together, but that doesn't mean we don't take the steps to transform and to become different. And so as we've talked already, there's a weekend coming up next weekend that we're all incredibly excited about around here. Baptism is that moment of saying, I'm going to follow Jesus, and I'm going to let everybody else know that this is happening. I'm going to create a memory. I'm going to create a mile marker in my life that I can look back to and say, that was the moment I decided that my imperfections, that my non-optimal status, that my was not going to get the best of me. That I was going to learn to live with God and other people in a very real and very powerful way. So I want to encourage you, if you've never done it, if you've got that decision made and you're like, yeah, I want to be on board with Jesus, and you've done it in here, this is a moment to really blow that out and to take an incredible step of faith in what God is going to do. And we need you to do that. Together, we need to do that because we need to see that there are people who have jumped in and they're together with us in the valley. Last but not least, what we know is that this is going to happen. The valley will eventually end. The valley will eventually end. The message of Jesus is that. More than anything else, the message of Jesus is this is not forever. The darkness that you're walking through is not going to last forever. And so the writer of Hebrews actually comes back to this and says, encourage one another all the more as you see the day approaching. What day is he talking about? The day when valleys end. The day when light cracks through the darkness. The day when we walk out the other side stronger, more committed, more connected than we've ever been in our life. It's back in that same hospital in Orlando with my friend John. We started to see progress in his daughter. She was starting to come around. She was conscious. She was blinking her eyes. And she eventually came home. We didn't know when it was going to happen. It came like a month later. And she's fine now. She bears some scars. She has a paralysis on one side of her face. And she can't walk with her braces anymore. She has to use a wheelchair, but she came home. And so we're waiting right inside the door to get buzzed into the ward where his daughter is. And we're standing up against the wall. And as we're standing there, we're both in this he hasn't slept in a while, showering, I don't think it happened. So we're both in that little phase, when you haven't showered and you don't feel like your best. So we're both standing there, and I'm, of course, being all pastoral, being Mr. Pastor guy, in the midst of the dark. We're in the dark valley I need to maintain. And so as we're standing there, there's this wall, there's this screen of pictures. And it starts flipping all these different pictures, and they're of sea, like fish and all kinds of stuff in the ocean. And they're meant to calm people. It's a nice blue color. And so we're standing there looking at it, and then a picture comes up. And I don't know that the photographer was paying much attention, but it's two whales. And it appears that they were caught somewhat accidentally, and it might not be that, but it appears they were caught in kind of a romantic moment. And I'm standing there, and I'm in the valley, and I'm all pastoral, but I feel like I need to laugh at that. But I got to be here with him. I got to be strong, be pastoral. And so I'm standing there looking at the picture, waiting for it to flip so that this moment of tension goes by. And I listen, and I hear John go. The next 2.5 minutes is tear-driven laughter for both of us. In the middle of the children's ward of the Orlando Children's Hospital, we're laughing uncontrollably. And somebody, I think it was him, he pulled out his phone and went and took a picture of it. And so now every once in a while, we'll send each other the picture of the whales. Why? Because it means the valley ends. And we get to laugh. And we get to celebrate. That moment is going to come to an end. Remember what the psalm says. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Through does not mean we build a house there. Through does not mean that we stay. Through does not mean we can't escape. It does mean we can't go over or around. This valley has got to happen, and we will be stronger because of it, but we are always going through. And at some point, we will get to the end of it. At some point, the valley, the darkness will end. It will be over. And we will step into this bigger and more beautiful life. I know that because the ironic thing about Psalm 23 is it's usually read at funerals, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And death is sometimes for us the biggest, the darkest valley. And then there's Jesus. You see, Jesus died for us for a lot of reasons, one being to erase the guilt of our sin. But Jesus also died for us so that he could go first. So he could walk through that valley that scares us to death almost as much as public speaking, go through that dark valley of death, and come out the other side and look back and go, hey guys, I came through. Come on. Come on. So whatever that dark valley is that you're facing right now, whatever that pain, that stress, whether you chose it or somebody else chose it for you, Jesus is standing on the other end of that valley saying, I'm going to be with you, but we're also going through. We're not staying. At some point, one day, this valley is going to end. And you and I, if we just accept that, if we receive Jesus as our guide and the presence with us in the valley, we will go through. And on the other side, there's an amazing amount of life. And then we all of us together, get to say this amazing thing that we find in 1 Corinthians that says, death has been swallowed up in victory. I taunt you, death. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? Jesus says it might be dark, but we're going through. We're not staying. The valley does not get to win. So if you're facing a dark moment, if you're an underdog, if you're in the battle of your life, if this is the darkest moment you can remember, just know you don't have to stay, but you can go through. And Jesus is with us moving through that time. It seems fitting right now that we're going to celebrate communion together. Because communion is a lot of things. It's a tradition that the church has done for thousands of years. But the biggest thing is, communion is the celebration together that the darkness of the valley, the darkness of death, the darkness of sin does not get to win. At the end of the story, the valley ends. And Jesus says there is life to be found on the other side. Whenever I lead people through communion, I always say, on the night he was betrayed. And I think that's important for us to remember, because as Jesus sat down with his disciples and passed bread and wine, you have to know he knew it was coming. He was in the middle of a dark valley, probably the darkest he'd ever faced. And in that moment, he thought, the thing I need the most is these guys around a table. We need to eat together. We need to connect with each other. They aren't optimal. They all would have raised their right hands. They will bail on him later. They are not perfect, but they're also not optional. Jesus said, I need you around the table right now because this is a dark spot. But listen, when you eat this bread and you drink this cup, just be reminded, I'm going through, and I'll meet you on the other side. The valley doesn't get to win. So as we take communion today, they're going to pass the baskets here in a moment. And there are cups in there. Take a cup and hold it. We're all going to take communion together. If you're a follower of Jesus, we welcome you to come to this table and take communion with us. While those things are being passed, we're actually going to sing a relatively familiar song. If it's not familiar to you, just listen and you'll catch on. But if you want to sing with us as they're passing the elements, feel free to do that. Just please don't stand. Stay seated so we can actually pass the elements across and everybody can get them. Again, this is a moment where we get to celebrate the most beautiful news ever, is that even the darkest valleys will someday end.